I will give you an introduction about what the digital preservation of business processes is about. So, just to set your right expectations, we're not talking about what digital preservation is about. That will be covered at PASIC. There'll be a boot camp tomorrow. You might have a bit of a background about what digital preservation is. If you don't, it doesn't matter either. We're giving you a pretty high-level introduction of digital preservation and business concepts, and I think they'll be useful for you to take away, even if you're not a digital preservation expert, and you won't be a digital preservation expert at the end of the day. You'll just sort of have a good global overview, I think, of what this is about. We're an EU project. We're a 3-year project about halfway through. You can find more information about us on the web at timbusproject.net. You can email Wasif actually at info@timbusproject.net, and you can follow us on Twitter. So our consortium has 11 partners. We have industry partners, we have research partners, and SMEs. The Digital Preservation Coalition, my organization, is actually a coalition of about 40 partners who are interested in digital preservation in Ireland and in the UK. So there is a large number of organizations behind this project. So this is, for me, sort of the key slide to set the context for you. I have created this plane, two-dimensional, with the vertical axis showing an interest in longevity. And here we have two disciplines, digital preservation and business continuity management, that are both interested in longevity of items. I've put digital preservation a bit higher because I think in digital preservation we're looking at possibly hundreds of years. Business continuity, we're looking into decades. And on the horizontal axis, I have plotted complexity of the things we're dealing with. So I have a digital preservation background, and in digital preservation, we started out by having basically files that were given into our care, mostly in memory institutions that had a real long-term goal for preserving the things given into their care. And so we thought about, what do we do if they become obsolete, if our data carriers become obsolete, if the software and hardware that they run on become obsolete. And we figured out, well, how do we best create library systems, and what are the best practices for preserving them. And then that quickly went over to the preservation of data. Now there's a very active community on the preservation of scientific data. And from the early days, it was very clear that we need representation information. That's an OAIS term, and basically what it means is it's all the information we need in addition to the actual files to make sense of them later. And we have to have a designated community in mind. That means we have to have a community of users in mind that will have special needs, and we need to provide them with all the information they need so they can use these things later on. So this is a lot about semantics, making sense of things. And part of representation information is, of course, the software on which we can render or execute files, and the hardware on which we can do that. And so in recent years, there was a development towards services. So we're not only talking about keeping our software and hardware in-house anymore. We have data in the cloud, we have services in the cloud, we have platforms in the cloud, which causes us a lot of worry because these things are completely out of our control. And the owners of software, for example, would not want us to have a complete insight of what the software is. So that makes preservation really hard. And then at the end of my complexity line is processes. So, for example, if you want to preserve scientific data, you can say, here's a publication, and ask people to believe that your results are true. You can do better and give them the data and say, here's the data on which I've based my claims. So you have more credibility already. But the data that you give people is only as good as the processes that have created the data, the software and the algorithms and the thought process behind. So there's a real need also to have process descriptions as part of the representation information that makes sense of your files and of your data. And so this is where the digital preservation community that joined the TIMBUS project came from. So they stood here and they said, I care about this, what do I need? Now on the other side, we have the business continuity management. And I'm not a business continuity management expert, but Steve will be able to give a lot more detail on this. But basically they start looking at the processes and they say, I have really valuable processes. They're important to my business or to my science, and I need to preserve those. And so they look into, well, what all makes up the processes and what could go wrong? And what can I do in order to keep them going? So they're looking from this perspective. And so what the TIMBUS project does is basically trying to put them together. All right. What I'd like to say is about files and data, that's relatively easy to preserve in the sense we copy them somewhere safe and we have good processes of taking care of them. Software gets already harder because you have questions about what is it? Is it the binaries? Is it the source code? If we get into things like hardware services and processes, we can't actually preserve them digitally as they are. So what we need to do is we need to come up with proxy descriptions. So if I have what I call a context component, the thing that makes up the whole domain that you've just looked at. If it's non-digital, I can't just digitally preserve it. So I need to create a descriptive metadata that gives me enough information that I know what the functionality of this component is so that I can redeploy it later. If I have a digital context component, for example, software, then I can preserve it as it is, but I don't necessarily have to. I might not even want to. Maybe I'd rather preserve a UML activity diagram, a functional description of the software. And if in 30 years' time I want to use it, I might be much more interested in re-implementing it. So there are choices to be made whether we preserve the actual item or whether we preserve a proxy description. So TIMBUS is about developing methods, processes, and tools. And we want to ensure the continued access to business processes and to the whole environment that I've shown you on this diagram. And so we try to align digital preservation with enterprise risk management and with business continuity management, and that's what we're going to introduce to you today. And on the other hand, we want to explore digital preservation from a different perspective, from the businesses.